Hi, I'm Anna from Post My Book. Sure I was going to say something, but I've forgotten what it was going to be. But anyway, I've got some new books that I've read. Well, they're not new. I think I had a little bit of a TBR, and these are some of the books that were on the TBR. I might have diverted a little bit from what I was going to read, but at least I've read three books from the TBR. One of them was Ellie Griffin's Crossing Places. This is I suppose you would call it a thriller. Not a fast thriller, I guess, but it's a thriller nonetheless. And the main character, who's called Ruth, is an archaeologist. I think she describes herself as an archaeologist. I know there are different terms, but I think she's described as an archaeologist. And she well loves her job, and she lives alone with her cats somewhere nearby the sea. She's quite happy, apart from the fact that she doesn't get on with her parents. Her mum is always one who tells her that, well, really, you ought to be doing this, that, and the other. But Ruth is quite happy with her life. But anyway, one day they discover, while they're out on the digs, they discover some bones. Or it might have been that there were some policemen who discovered some bones within the area that she was in. And she was called in to have a look at the bones because this policeman, who's called Nelson, had this cold case that happened to be about 13 years ago. And it was about a young girl who disappeared, and they've never found any trace of her. So he was thinking that perhaps this was the young girl. But as it turned out, it actually was not. But the book itself transpires that Ruth, the archaeologist, and Nelson, to build a kind of relationship so that they help each other in trying to solve the mystery of this girl, even though they're coming from different angles and they both have their own jobs. Somehow they do become entwined in looking for the young girl who goes missing. Nelson and Wilson are not two people who would necessarily be attracted to each other. Nelson is married and he has a very pretty wife and he has two daughters, while Ruth is described as, she's had boyfriends. She had someone who was called Peter, and that was a recent breakup. And then she also admires her hand ledare. What are they called? The one who guides them when they're still in school, or still in university, when you're still doing your thesis and all that. Eric, who's from Norway, but Eric's back in Norway. But I think she had quite the hots for him at the time, but he's also married. So as it turns out, the story goes on to searching for the loss of this girl, and an important thing happens is that yet another girl disappears around about soon after Nelson comes onto the picture, and the girl is around about the same age. She was playing in the garden, and unfortunately there was no one watching her, and she disappeared. So then Nelson has to investigate this case, and Ruth helps him. So the story goes on like that. And as it happens, Eric, who was then in Norway, also comes back to Norway. But his plans wasn't to help Nelson to find this. He had a different agenda. But he was also happy to see Ruth. So that is pretty much how it goes. It is a thriller. It's kind of a slow thriller, and it is the investigation into finding the missing girl and the cold case. And as I said when I did my TBR list, I had started this book and read the odd few pages, and I figured it was going to be an easy book. So I also thought, that's one book why I will read it. And it actually is an easy book to read. I cannot complain. So I'm now reading another one of her books. The only thing I would probably complain about, and I probably shouldn't complain about because I think it's probably almost self-evident, is when you get to the end, it's sort of like an anticlimax, because it's just the last few pages that tell you who's done what. Having said that, there were some, is it him or is it him? Or perhaps it's him or perhaps it's her. So it's not that it's completely obvious who does that, who the killer is. In fact, that was probably quite relatively surprising. I was going to say quite surprising, but I think I probably guessed, but that really was just a guess, because I'm always guessing it's him or it's him or it's him or it's him. And so it's just coincidence it happens to be the right person. But otherwise, yep, I think reading her books, they are quite easy to read. And if you want a thriller that at least has something interesting to say and it keeps you going and it's not too long, this one works very well. So that was Ellen Griffith it's Crossing the Places by Ellen Griffith. And it's a Dr. Ruth Galloway mystery. That was the first. And then I had this one. Now this one was not in my TBR list at all, but I borrowed it at the same time as I borrowed the other books. And I started reading it just because I needed a break from the book I was reading, I think. And I needed something shortish. If you see the cover, it's a hand, and the book is called All Night Blood is Black by David Diop. I can tell you a little about the author himself here. He was born in Paris and he's raised in Senegal. He's a professor at the University of Pau au Pays de la Dour, where his research includes such topics as 18th century French literature, European representation of Africa in the 17th and 18th centuries. At Night, All Blood is Black is his second novel. This is an interesting book. Trigger warnings, definitely that. The hand might be able to give you an idea, because it's about a man who's called, Alfa Ndiaye, who is a Senegalese man, and he finds himself fighting a so-called chocolate soldier with the French army during the World War. There were a group of African soldiers who were taken to work as, or to fight in the World War for the French, and Alfie was one of them. And Alfie had a friend who was called Mandeba, and Mandeba, unfortunately, he gets shot. And before the time Mandeba got shot, both of them had I think they always had the idea that they'll get out of this war and they'll be able to make lots of money and live the dream that they planned when they were young. But that didn't happen because Mandeba got shot. And when Mandeba got shot, a whole lot of things changed in Alpha's head. He was no longer quite the obedient soldier that he otherwise would have been. Like every time the general whistles the bell for the African soldiers to jump out of trenches and go and start fighting, they do it without a thought. But after Mandeba's death, Alpha changes. And he also had a lot of conflicting ideas, because when he went to Mandeba, when he was dying, Mandeba was there begging him to kill him because he was in such pain, and he didn't want to have the agonizing pain that he was going through, and he didn't want the vultures to come and eat his remains. But Alpha thought, no, he couldn't do it. It wouldn't be right that even though they were as close as brothers, these two had grown up together. Mandeba had brought Alpha in as an orphan and asked his family to adopt him, so they had adopted him. But Alpha just could not bring himself to kill Mandeba, no matter how much he asked. And he said Mandeba asked him 3 times and still he couldn't do it. So in the end, Mandeba dies in pain, and Alpha carries the body back to the trenches where his group is. And from there on, Alpha has begun to lose, I guess in the normal sense, people call him unhinged, because he starts things as though he's been freed from this idea that he must do everything the French general tells him. He does not. And even if he does it because he's free, and he understands that he's doing it of his free will. And so every time he goes up in the mornings, he starts planning how he's going to take his revenge on those who killed Mandeba. And he does this in a kind of gruesome way. And so as not to be too gruesome, all I'll say is that he cuts off the hands of the enemy, and he takes them with him back to the trenches and tries to preserve them. And at first all his fellow mates, because there are other African soldiers there, all his fellow mates are, yes, well done, you have shown them what's what, that kind of thing. And he keeps doing this, but after a while his fellow mates begin to be a little afraid of him, because there's always this case of black magic, so you never quite know, has he gone over to the other side? Is he all right? What's happening? Why does he do this? So they started backing away from him in the end, and he started eating his food alone and all that. So this story actually depicts, I think the point of this story is to depict how African soldiers, through Alpha, African soldiers find a kind of freedom, question why they're fighting all for a country that's not there, and they're not getting much out of it. The French general just tells them, get up, whistles his whistle, get up, go fight. Many of them die even before they come out of the trenches. And Alpha thinks, well, why should I do this? So it's this conflict in his mind. And also, while he's working out that he's free from not being able to question the general, he also comes to terms with what he should have done for Mandeba. That's to say, he should have killed him before he had to ask 3 times. In fact, he should have killed him, because he didn't kill him in the end, he just died. So he comes to that point, and there are a lot of reflections about their early lives, how they were such brothers, how they'd made plans, and how it has come to this. So it's not a long book. It ends in a different way, and that's also worth interest. That's worth reading. So I shall not tell the ending. What you need to know is that the intention of this book is to understand a different perspective from a different kind of group of people. Adeba, his mind became free from just being a soldier for the French army. Doesn't necessarily mean that what he did was good, but how he saw it was different from how he was just, I guess, in a sense, just being used. They had, at the end of it, I don't guess they offered them so much. So yeah, so that was that. I actually did find this book interesting. I hadn't got a clue what it was about. I borrowed it just because it was quite a short book. It has no more than 143 pages. It has a very interesting ending, which I'm still reflecting over. I'm not quite sure whether I understood it, but I think I did. But it was interesting. And because being African myself, I do not say I don't believe in these things, witch doctors and things like that. I believe, if I can believe in God, if I can believe in the devil, there's no reason why I can't believe in these things. So I have an open mind to all these things. So that was that one. Now my third book is The House Gun by Nadine Gordimer. This was another book that was interesting. I actually looked on the good book reviews, and I saw that some people felt that they found the characters cold and detached, and they couldn't get close to them, so they didn't enjoy the book. And I just had to fix that stand. While otherwise, here on the front page, The Independent reads, gripping, so well written that it draws you into itself like a dream. I urge you to read it. Let's see. On a human level, the book is a triumph. The anguish, the confliction, emotions of having a son dissected in public view are very real. The feelings that drive the mother and father apart, then pull them together, ring and sound true. As a parable of South Africa, its tenderness grip on transition. This is up with Gardimer's finest work. It's a passion, multi-layered story of awakening. That was the Yorkshire Post. And The Guardian says, this is a memorable novel that goes on growing the reader's mind after it has been put down. An engrossingly and deeply considered novel about violence and its consequences. Esquire. And so on and so forth. I enjoyed this book. I was quite surprised. I do understand what people say when they say they find the characters a bit detached. But having said that, I understand they are quite detached, because I figure that when you have such a trauma, the book is about Duncan, who's the son of Claudia and Harold. And he has been convicted of having killed one of his roommates. No, they don't live in the same room, but they live in the same compound. Duncan lives in a cottage, the compound, with a girl called Lillian, I think she is. And the book is about Duncan having killed one of his roommates with a house gun. And so, as far as his parents are concerned, these are parents who have always thought that they brought up their child right. They only have one child, and you're thinking, how can this go wrong? What went wrong? And then I think initially in the beginning, they're not sharing their feelings. It's too much of a shock. So you kind of isolate yourself and insulate yourself. You don't want to talk it. You don't want to talk to it to your neighbors. You don't want to talk to it to your friends, and even your friends are not always so willing anyway now that it's such a big thing and it's come out in the paper. So of course it becomes this kind of isolation from the world. You encapsulate yourself in your own cocoon and look from the inside out. And then the other things that I thought were so well described by Nadine in this book is she has such a good observation of people in general. The way she talks about when she's in prison, what she sees is like she's there. Perhaps she's been there, because it's very much like she's there when she's describing what is happening. Either that or she's a fly in the wall. But she really does have such a good sense of description of the people. And the girl, no, perhaps the girl was called Lucy, actually, not Lillian. Let me see. Should be here somewhere. See everybody else but the girl. See Duncan, Lucy, fish fingers. Yeah. No, I can't actually find the name of the girl. This is crazy. Anyway, let's just say her name began with L. That much I can remember. And what it was in this book is also a case that Nadine explains how difficult, how just something happening to someone in your family just brings you to a completely different world, which, for example, you've only listened to on the news. For example, being in prison. Before this son was taken to prison, this was something they'd never thought that there would ever be. But it's a whole new world for them, and it's, as Nadine wrote, everything also works in everything also works in prisons. The computers work, the people work, there's someone cleaning. So even though it's new for them, all these things still work. And then also being in court, that's also something that's very new for them. When they're looking at the people who are there and thinking, those people are perhaps not the people I'd normally see outside, but here I am. And then another issue they had was that they were assigned an advocate who was black. Now, although both the two are not racist, it's not quite that they have friends that are black or any connections with people that are black. So Harold tried to sound out whether the advocate was going to be good enough, and he was told, "Yep, just be glad that you've got the man you've got," because he is definitely top of his class. He's always been top of his class. So whatever happens, even if there might have been some affirmative action somewhere along the line, it was not necessary in his case. He well deserves his position. The other thing that was also important in this book was that during the time of Duncan's court case, the death sentence was still available. So there was always the question of, would he receive the death sentence? There was discussion that they should take away the death sentence, but it was still on the tables at the time. Would he receive the death sentence or what? It was a very gripping book, and I have to say, it is, for me, it was exactly as the Independent said, which said that it's so well written, it draws you into itself like a dream. I couldn't help but being a part of this story. I couldn't help but feeling what Claudia and Harold were feeling, and hoping, even though it's not necessarily right, but hoping that Duncan will be let off somehow, because all the trauma is on this side. There's very little trauma spoken about the man who was shot. And there was a little bit of a love triangle. Well, not exactly, but kind of ish. But now I think I'm saying too much about the book. Very good book, read it. I'll definitely have to find another one of hers. But I'm glad I've read this one, because this one is another one that was on my African writers list. Still many, many more on that book list, but at least it's introduced me to this one. So until then, thank you very much for listening, and bye-bye.